Let's discuss about the nervous system in this presentation. So nervous system is the main system of our body. It is the one which thinks, which carries out all the functions of our body. It is kind of one of the most important system of the body. Now what are the parts of the nervous system? There are two parts. There is one which is the central and the other which is the peripheral. Now brain and spinal cord, they form the central part of the nervous system, whereas cranial and spinal nerves, the ganglia of related with the nerves, the sensory neurons, and all those junctions between the nerves and the muscles called as neuromuscular junctions, they are part of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, this diagram I have added to just to help identify that the brain and spinal cord is the central one, and all those spinal nerves all over the body which cause the movement are the parts of the peripheral nervous system. Again, another slide I added to help understand the concept of central and peripheral nervous system more clearly. So the central one has the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral one has two functions, a autonomic one and the somatic one. The autonomic one is which controls the self-regulated actions of the internal organs and the glands. Like there are so many functions which are carried out by the organs in our body, like the digestion of the food and everything, which we are not telling it to do, right? It is going on its own. So that is autonomic. It is going on its own in the body. Whereas somatic is the one where the voluntary muscles, which we tell, if we want to drink water, we tell the hand to lift the glass of water from the table, right? So that is the somatic, that is controlled by us. That's a voluntary movement. The autonomic has two parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic is the arousing one, which keeps you active and alert, and parasympathetic is the calming one, which generally keeps the body calm. Okay, so when we are in a stress condition, the sympathetic system takes the upper hand. Okay, because it's the arousing one, the quicker acting one. Parasympathetic becomes a little less because it's the calming one, it's the slow one. Now coming back to the diagram of our brain, the central nervous system, this is the frontal lobe, these are the parietal lobes, there is a temporal lobe which you could see. This is like the top view, right? So you cannot see, but the temporal lobe is over here on the lateral side. These are the cerebral hemispheres, both of these, and posteriorly also this is the occipital lobe. Okay, we know that brain, it carries a lot of information, right? It processes it, it makes decisions, we come to know about the responses. So whatever function is done by the brain, we come to know about it now, most of the times. So responses which the brain gives can be in the form of autonomic, that is involuntary, that is like a brain can tell the stomach to absorb or not absorb the food, or it can be in the form of somatic, like voluntary, which like the brain can tell to lift the glass of water or not, right? So brain can give both the kinds of responses. It is protected by the meninges, the dura mater, which is the outermost, then the arachnoid, and then the pia mater. And we know that the dura mater is sticking to the skull bone, okay, the skull vault, and the pia mater is sticking to the brain. So here the one which is sticking is the pia mater. It's like totally adherent to the brain. Okay, it's very difficult to take out the pia mater. Then there are cranial and facial bones over the brain which protect it. These bones are joined with each other by the sutures. In the children, in the newborns, the sutures are not closed, so you have to take extra care of the head in those cases, because the sutures are not closed. So even a minor in change in position can cause injury to the brain, right? So in newborns we have to take extra care while holding their head. That is because the sutures have not yet ossified. As the child grows, as the newborn becomes adult, then the sutures start ossifying. Okay, there are you can see, like in kids there are foramen. The foramen sorry, in our brain there are in our skull bone there are foramen. The foramen helps in passing of the different structures. So foramen is nothing but opening through which the important structures like the vessels and the nerves can pass through, because you need the space, right? Like even our skull bone, if it would be continuously round circle, then how is the head going to communicate with the rest of the body? So for that there is a foramen in the bone which allows the communication to happen. Okay, that's the largest foramen of the body. Now this is a CSF circulation slide. So CSF is the fluid which is around the brain, which protects the, which kind of provides a cushion to the brain, and it protects the brain in the injuries. How is the CSF formed? It is produced by the choroid plexus of the ventricles. Ventricles are the empty spaces in our brain. Like you can see, this is the cerebral cortex. In between there is these ventricles. So CSF is the ultrafiltration, or it is just the plasma that is ultrafiltrated, and then it is allowed in the brain to circulate. Okay, and what does it do? Not only in the brain, also here, like through the spinal cord also. Okay, everywhere it is circulating from head till almost our sacrum, the bone on which we sit. Okay, almost just a few levels above it, like L4, L5, till then the CSF keeps on circulating, right? So CSF flows through the ventricles into the subarachnoid space by the apertures. You can see over here, this is the CSF flowing out. It will flow into the subarachnoid space. You can see it is coming out from here, going into the subarachnoid space, and it can also be reabsorbed by the venous sinuses, which we saw in the previous slide. Remember, we saw these are the venous sinuses. The venous, they can drain the CSF. Okay, so that is how the CSF circulation keeps on happening. The plasma keeps on getting filtrated, and after the circulation, after providing the nutrient to the brain, it can get reabsorbed by the venous. Now this is the areas of the brain and their functions. So this is the frontal lobe, which is useful for the smell, the temporal lobe, which is useful for the intellectual and emotional functions. There is a Broca's area. As I said, Broca's area is generally on the dominant side. So if you are a right-handed person, your left hemisphere is dominant. If you are a left-handed person, your right hemisphere is dominant. In bidextrous people, generally the left hemisphere is dominant. Okay, frontal lobe is useful for judgment and foresight and the voluntary movement. The motor cortex is responsible for the movement that we do. The sensory cortex, that is like located over here, that is helpful for the pain and the heat and sensations. The parietal lobe is function is to understand the language, to form the ability to understand that what is being spoken to us. Temporal lobe is for hearing it. Occipital lobe is for vision. Wernicke's area is to be able to speak, and cerebellum is for the coordination, right? So the cerebellum is very important to keep the coordination when we are walking, when we are climbing the stairs, and all those functions. You need the cerebellum to maintain your balance, to maintain your coordination, right? Brainstem is responsible for all the main functions of the body, like swallowing the food, breathing, the heart beating. It's also the wakefulness. So brainstem is also important, so that it should function, so that the person can get up in the morning, it can wake up. Okay, another slide to help understand the functional areas of the brain. So motor area, we can see, which can control the voluntary. The sensory area, they are lying close to each other, right, adjacent to each other. Okay, frontal lobe for the movement and problem solving. Generally, if somebody has got somebody's personality changes, there is something wrong with the frontal lobe. Okay, some hemorrhage or stroke has occurred into that has affected the frontal lobe. The Broca's area, where speech, the temporal lobe, which is here, green colored, hearing, language and memory. The brain stem, you can see over here, the blue colored one, for the consciousness, breathing, heart rate. The yellow area, like in the temporal lobe only it is. That's the Wernicke area for language and comprehension. This pink color cerebellum is for posture, balance, coordination of movement. This color is for occipital lobe, and the purple color over here for parietal lobe for sensations, language, perception. Okay. Now there are motor neuron lesions. Okay, we're not going to the lesions directly. I'm just trying to show you what are motor neurons. Okay, so there are two motor neurons. One is the upper one and another one is the lower one. So upper one is the generally located in the brain, in the central system, from which the nerve can start. Okay, then it goes down, and then there is another motor neuron in the spinal cord, from which the nerve another nerve will come out, which will supply the peripheral muscle. Okay, so this portion from UMN to the upper motor to lower motor, that is called the spinal tract. Okay, they are the nerves which are running through the spinal cord, and they are called the spinal tract. Okay, so to help you understand this peripheral nervous system, this is a better diagram. You see over here, I have given an example. This is the upper motor neuron. This is the spinal tract that is coming out. It is passing through the midbrain, through the pons, to the upper medulla. Now all these tracks, all these spinal tracks, so if they are arising from the right side of the brain, they decussate, that is they cross over in the lower medulla, and they will supply the left side of the body. Okay, you can see over here. Sorry, I took a break, so I will start from the beginning. So we are talking about the spinal tracts, which are running from the brain to the body and to the end source, that is the skeletal muscle, through which for if we are talking about the motor functions. So these are the spinal tracts which are going on in our body. Now this is the upper motor neuron. So the place from which where the nerve will originate is called as the upper motor neuron. And then the nerves, the spinal tracts, at that point they are called as spinal tracts. They pass through the midbrain, the pons, and through the upper medulla, through the and before passing through the lower medulla, they cross over, they decussate, and then they pass through the lower medulla into the spinal cord. And here in the spinal cord you will have the lower motor neuron, from which the further nerve will come out, which will supply the skeletal muscle, and by which the action can be done. Okay, so that is how the impulses are being carried out in our body. Impulses for all the sensory functions, for the motor functions. And the thing is, there are ascending tracks, there are descending tracks. If we are talking about the motor functions, they are generally carried out by the descending tracks, and if we are talking about the sensory functions, then they are done by the ascending tracks. Okay, that's okay, that's just for information, but that is how it is conducted. Okay, the next is cranial nerves. Again, the basics, we are doing the basics of the nervous system, the normal physiology. So we have to discuss the cranial nerves which arise in our brain. Number one is called the olfactory one, which is supplying to the nose, which helps us in smelling. Number two is the optic nerve, you see over here, the optic nerve. This is called the optic chiasma, and this is the place where the meningeal artery is supplying the cerebral artery is supplying blood, and this is also the place where maximum aneurysms happen in the brain. Okay, so this is the optic nerve which supplies the eye. Number three is the oculomotor nerve. It also supplies the eye, but it supplies the muscles of the eye. Okay, the muscles which help in the movement of the eye. So you can say that number one and two are the sensory nerves, the sensory functions, right? Seeing, smelling, all these are sensory functions. And the third is a motor nerve, that is, it moves the skeletal muscles of the eyes to do the function, do the activities. Okay, so that is oculomotor nerve. Fourth is a trochlear nerve, which also supplies the superior oblique muscle of the eye, which helps in the movement of the eye, up and down movement of the eye. Okay, and that is supplied by the trochlear, and that is also motor nerve, because again it is supplying a skeletal muscle, right? Then fifth number is the trigeminal nerve. Trigeminal nerve is the only nerve which has both the components. No, I think, sorry, scratch that, I think vagus also has one. But so trigeminal nerve is an important bigger nerve which has both the motor and the sensory functions. Trigeminal nerve is important and big because it covers the face, so all the sensations on the face, we feel the heat and the cold and everything on the face is felt by the trigeminal nerve. Then the sinuses and the teeth, so whenever a tooth are paining, probably the pain is being carried by the trigeminal nerve. Okay, and what is the motor function? The motor function is, it is supplying the muscles of mastication. There are 5 muscles of mastication. What I mean by mastication is chewing. So there are 5 muscles which help in chewing. Remember the buccinator and all that? So those muscles are supplied by the trigeminal nerve. Okay, the sixth is the abducent nerve. So abducent nerve helps in the is the motor nerve, and it supplies the external rectus. So we remember, we got the acronym for it, and how we used to remember is, all the muscles of the eye are supplied by the olfactory nerve, sorry, not olfactory, by the oculomotor nerve, my third nerve. Okay, third nerve, oculomotor nerve. And the remaining, there are only 2 muscles which are not supplied, that is remembered by SO4 LR6. So SO4 is superior oblique, is supplied by the 4th nerve, that is the trochlear nerve, and LR6 lateral rectus, that is muscle is supplied by the 6th nerve, cranial nerve, that is the abducent nerve. Okay, so the short form is SO4 LR6. Okay, and what are the other muscles? There are medial rectus, there is inferior oblique, all those other muscles of the eye are supplied by this 3rd nerve. Okay, now coming from trigeminal, the 5th, we are on the 7th. We went to the 6th, and now on the 7th nerve, which is the facial nerve. Facial nerve supplies all the muscles of the face. Okay, like you can literally put the palm of your hand on the face near the ear, and you can say that that is the fingers that are stretched across your face are the branches of the facial nerve. Okay, maybe in the class I will show it and do you I'll demonstrate how we used to remember the facial nerve. Okay, like you can literally remember that it is supplying all the muscles of the face. Okay, 8th is a vestibulocochlear nerve, which is actually a nerve which supplies the inner ear. It has 2 parts. Okay, there is a vestibular and a cochlear part. You can see over here, this is the inner ear diagram. Now vestibular and cochlear, so they both, vestibular portion helps in maintaining the equilibrium, and cochlear helps in hearing. Okay, carrying the impulses of hearing, sound. So that is a vestibulocochlear nerve. Okay, 9th is glossopharyngeal nerve. You can see it is glossopharynx. Gloss is like lung related, and the pharynx related. Okay, sorry, so gloss is tongue related, and pharynx is pharyngeal is pharynx related. So glossopharyngeal is the 9th nerve. As the name says, the motor part supplies the pharyngeal musculature, and the sensory part supplies the posterior part of the tongue, tonsil and pharynx. So our tongue also has different taste sensations, right? So there is the one taste sensation that is at the tip, then there is the sweet which is on the lateral sides, and then there is a central area, and then there is a posterior area. Okay, so the I cannot remember correctly, but if I'm not wrong, the tip is for the bitter taste, the posterior is probably for the salty, and the lateral side is for the sweet taste. So if I'm not wrong, probably the salty sensations are carried by the glossopharyngeal nerve, but I need to check it. Okay, I'm sorry, I don't remember it correctly, but we can just remember it as the posterior part of the tongue is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, that's the ninth nerve. 10th is the vagus nerve. It has two components, motor and sensory. The motor component supplies the heart, helping the contraction of the heart muscle, lungs, bronchi, GI tract. Everything is having functions, right? There is peristalsis in the GI tract. The bronchi are collapsing and expanding with each breath. The lung are collapsing and expanding with each breath, and the bronchi is also letting the air exchange and letting the air pass through. So, and the heart is contracting. Those are all the motor functions of the organ. They are done by the vagus nerve. Okay, controlled by the vagus nerve. The sensory part of the vagus nerve also again supplies all these organs: heart, lungs, bronchi, trachea, larynx, pharynx, GI tract, and external ear. So whenever there is any pain or anything in the heart, whenever the heart has a MI, the vagus nerve is the one which will carry the pain sensation. Whenever we are coughing too much and the lungs are uh, in getting rubbed or irritated because of the coughing, the pain sensations will be carried out by the sensory part of the vagus nerve. Okay, um, then we are coming to the 11th nerve, that is the accessory nerve, and that is has a motor function only, and it supplies the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius muscles. Remember the two muscles of the neck. So whenever you say yes, whenever you say no, you are using the accessory nerve. Okay, that's the 11th nerve. The 12th is again hypoglossal and again related to the tongue. Okay, so you remember 9 and 12 both in multiples of 3, right? So they are both supplying the tongue, and both have gloss, the tongue synonym kind of word in it. So hypoglossal also supplies the muscles of the tongue, but the difference is that glossopharyngeal carried the sensory, the taste. Okay, while the hypoglossal carries the movement, that I'm speaking, the tongue can move around, and when you're chewing, the tongue can help in the chewing process. That is done by the hypoglossal nerve. Okay, so that is about the cranial nerves of the body. Now we are coming to the glial cells, that is the basic cells of our nervous system. They are the Schwann cells. The Schwann cells are the one which form the covering of the peripheral nervous system axons, as you can see over here. Then there is the oligodendrocytes. They form the myelin sheaths for the axons, so they are present, axons are present in the central nervous system. Schwann cells are in the peripheral nervous system covering, and oligodendrocytes are in the central nervous system covering. Okay, they form the myelin covering for the axons in the neurons in the central nervous system. Then there are microglial cells, which are kind of phagocytes of the nervous system. They eat away the bacteria and the waste and everything. Then there is these ependymal cells, which are also called kind of the epithelial cells. They help in secreting the CSF, not exactly secreting, but letting the plasma, filtering the plasma. That is done by these cells. So ependymal cells, they are lining the choroid plexus and everything. Then there are astrocytes. Astrocytes is kind of the what do you call it, the main cell of the nervous system. It kind of forms the links between the nerves in the capillaries, and it is the one which helps in carrying the impulses also. Okay, that is the astrocyte. Now we're talking about the neurons. Remember this, I have to show you. This is the neuron. Okay, so this you can see over here also, it's written neuron. Okay, so this is like an axon, and this is the myelin portion which is carrying the impulse, and it is going to another axon. Okay, now neuron, the regeneration of neuron is only possible if the cell body is visible, and you know what the cell body is, right? This is the cell body. If it is visible, then only the neurons can regenerate. Otherwise, the neurons, if they die once, they cannot regenerate. Okay, generally when damage occurs to the axons, section distal to injury dies because of the lack of nutrient, and it is removed by macrophages and Schwann cells. Okay, the Schwann cells attempt to form new tubes, but the new formations are not as good as the original ones. So what they're trying to say is, generally neurons once they die cannot grow. They, if they have the cell body, they will try to grow, but it will not be the same as the original one. Okay, so that's why the neurons are very well taken care of. That's why we maintain the glucose levels and we maintain the plasma osmolarity, because anything can lead to a change in the neuron functioning, and it can cause problems to the neuron, and the neuron can die, right? So, and once it dies, we are not going to get it back, right? So neurons, we have to take care. Now how does the neuron conduct the impulses? The name of the conduction is saltatory conduction. It's a weird name, but that's the name of the conduction, saltatory conduction. How does it occur? Is it occurs at the node of the Renvier. That's the name. I'll try and show you in a diagram so that we can understand. So node of Renvier is present in the myelinated fibers, and it may skip along rapidly and conduct the impulse. So what happens is, what exactly happens is, when a stimulus occurs, the sodium ions flow inside. That is the positive ions. Okay, when as soon as they flow inside, they depolarize it. It becomes positive impulse, and the positive impulse has to move forward, and as it moves forward, the potassium move outward to it moves forward. At the same time as the sodium is the impulse is moving forward, the potassium ion is coming outside, and as soon as the potassium ion comes out, it is again repolarizing it. Okay, because the positive ion came inside, it became depolarized, and because it became depolarized and the sodium, a positive ion came in, so there was no place for another potassium ion. Remember, a positive ion, remember I said sodium and potassium go in the opposite direction, so the potassium ion will go outside of the cell, and by it going out, it will repolarize it. That is how the impulse is getting conducted. Those impulses are studied on the electroencephalogram, EEG. Okay, to help understand, this is the axon, this is the myelin sheet. You can see over here also, this is axon, this is the myelin sheet. The area in between the two axons is called the node of Renvier. So here is where the sodium is coming in, so it is depolarizing and it is moving forward, and because the sodium has come in, the potassium is coming out, so it is repolarized and the impulse has moved on forward. Again, the sodium comes in, depolarizes, it moves forward, potassium comes out, repolarizes. Okay, that is how the conduction goes on. Okay, we just need to remember the saltatory name of the conduction, that is the saltatory conduction, and where does it happen? At the node of Renvier. Okay, now the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system has two parts, sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic, what does it do? Sympathetic causes the pupils to dilate. It causes the lens, it helps the lens to focus on the far away places by reducing the curvature. It helps the salivary gland to secrete the, it increases the viscosity of the secretions. It causes the heart to beat quickly, so it increases the rate and the pressure. The lungs, in the lungs, the sympathetic nerves causes the dilatation of the respiratory passages. In the GI tract, it decreases the motility. Kidney, it decreases the filtration rate. Male genitalia, it will cause an ejaculation. Vascular smooth muscle, it will be variable depending on the neurotransmitter. Sweat glands, there will be increased activity, and arteries to the skeletal muscle will be dilated. Okay, and veins, remember we discussed that in our fight and flight mode also. In the cortisol secretion, the sympathetic activity is increasing, so the skeletal muscle blood supply is increasing because you are going to run away, right? So this arteries will dilate, but all the other arteries which are supplying the other organs, they will constrict. Okay, the veins variable depending on the neurotransmitter, so they don't really have any definite function. Okay, so that is about the sympathetic nervous system. What does parasympathetic do? It does the opposite of the sympathetic. So pupils were dilating, and the lenses were helping to see far away. Remember, you are trying to run away. In the sympathetic, you are trying to run away, so your vision improves so that you can see the far away. The blood supply in the muscles increase so you can start running. Your heart starts beating quickly because you are going to start running. The respiratory passages also start dilating so that you can get more oxygen. So that is whole sympathetic effect. Now you have to think the opposite of that in parasympathetic. So the pupils will constrict, lens will have more for the near focus, salivary gland secretions will be more serous, the heart will be lower rate and pressure, the respiratory passages will constrict, there will be increased motility in the GI tract, the kidneys will have an increased filtration rate, the male genitalia will have an erection. So vascular smooth muscle will have relaxation. So this is the point where we are seeing the smooth muscles of the vessels. Here it is variable, right? Because the smooth muscle of the vessels are dilating in the skeletal muscle, but the vessels in going to the organs, it is constricting. That's why it is written variable. But in parasympathetic, we know vascular smooth muscle is going to relax. The sweat glands, there is no effect on the sweat glands, no effect on the skeletal muscles, and no effect on the veins. Okay, because there the parasympathetic effect, the receptors are not present, they are not working over there. Okay, so basically sympathetic and parasympathetic effect is done by the autonomic nervous system, and the hormones, you remember which are they? Epinephrine and norepinephrine. The receptors alpha 1, alpha 2, beta 1, beta 2, beta 3 receptors, which we did with the endocrine system, that is all the part of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, again just a diagrammatic presentation of the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Now we are going to start the pathology related to the nervous system.